Book 2, Chapter 2, A Lie Remembered. Ilara's Battle. Ilara's heart pounded as he yanked the door open, allowing Zira's firebolt to hiss through the doorway first. The searing flame struck true, and he burst through the entrance with twin elvish blades drawn, finding an orc warrior wreathed in smoke and fury. Its crude armor glowed with residual heat, burned flesh beneath, yet its yellowed teeth still bared in defiance. Years of training took over as Ilara's blades wove their lethal dance, the first strike slipping past the orc's pain-slowed guard, the second finding the weak spot between warped plates. The creature's eyes widened in final surprise as it collapsed, dark blood mixing with the ashes of Zira's spell. Heavy footfalls from above drew Ilara's attention to the stairway in the room's corner. Another orc, larger than the first, thundered down the stairs, a massive battle axe held high. Ilara shifted his stance, preparing to meet the new threat, when something whistled past his ear. A familiar fletching caught his eye as Doreen's arrow buried itself deep in the orc's chest, the impact forcing a bellow of pain from the creature's throat. Yet the monster pressed forward, its axe cutting a deadly arc through the air. Ilara's body responded instinctively, his primary blade rising to meet the attack. The impact sent vibrations through his arm, but his parry was true, deflecting the brutal strike aside with practiced efficiency. A sudden creak of hinges to his right surprised Ilara as he turned to face this new threat. Another orc burst through the side door with murderous intent, its battle axe raised high in a savage arc meant to split Ilara's skull. The creature's eagerness proved its undoing. The mighty swing carried too high, sending the axe head crashing into the wooden frame above. Ilara's mind raced, calculating angles of attack as he found himself caught between two adversaries. The familiar heavy footfalls of Morthal approaching from behind brought a measure of relief. Without needing to look, Ilara knew his companion had his back. The wet sound of Morthal's blade finding its mark in the stairway orc's throat confirmed his trust was well placed. Free to focus on the immediate threat, Ilara unleashed the combination he had perfected through countless hours of training. Left blade swept low, forcing the orc to shift its defense downward. Right blade followed high, catching the creature's shoulder. The final thrust with reverse grip found the orc's heart, and Ilara felt the familiar resistance of flesh giving way to steel. The orc's lifeblood spilled across the worn floorboards as it crumpled before him.
"More coming down!"
Morthal's warning rang out as heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. Ilara hesitated for a split heartbeat, then abandoned his position at the doorway, racing to meet the descending threat. His elvish blades caught the flickering light as he positioned himself at the base of the stairs, where four massive shapes emerged from the shadows above, their axes gleaming with deadly intent. A battle cry from the corridor shattered his focus. Ilara's head snapped around, horror etching itself across his features as the ancient weight of responsibility crushed against his chest. His doorway, stood empty, and through it charged an orc with its massive axe raised high, bearing down on Zira, who had taken cover near the far table. In that moment, Ilara's trained composure cracked, revealing the raw anguish of a protector forced to watch history repeat itself. One more guardian unable to hold two lines at once.
"Help me! Please, somebody help!"
Zira's panicked screams pierced the air as her trembling fingers wove the beginnings of a fire spell. Orange sparks danced uselessly against the orc's armor, too close, far too close for proper spell casting. The massive axe whistled through the air where her head had been a heartbeat before. Abandoning any pretense of fighting back, Zira scrambled backward, her dress tangling around her legs as she dove beneath the heavy oak table. The orc's axe crashed down, splintering the wooden surface inches from her face, sending splinters raining into her hair. Her terrified cries echoed off the walls, raw and primal.
Please, I don't want to die.
Something snapped in Ilara's mind. The farmhouse walls melted away, replaced by cold stone. The smell of blood and burning wood transformed into the dank air of that cursed cellar. Zyra's desperate pleas became Eli's voice, her final moments playing out before him once again.
Eli.
The name tore from his throat, raw with decades of guilt and grief.
Don't be afraid. I'm coming.
Abandoning his tactical position, blind to the dangers around him, Ilara charged through the mass of orcs. In his fractured reality, he was running to save his sister, to change that horrible night that had haunted him for so long. The first axe caught him on the back, but he barely felt it. The second blade bit deep into his shoulder, and still he pressed forward. Blood filled his mouth, but all he could see was Eli, small, scared Eli, reaching out for him through the flames. Through the haze of pain and memory, something spraying crimson across his face. Flames danced at the edges of his vision, always the flames, forever the flames. His legs gave way as he realized the cruel truth. He had failed her again. Time slowed to a crawl as Ilara fell to his knees. Through blood-blurred vision, he looked into Zira's wide, terrified eyes, but saw only his sister's face. His trembling hand reached out across what seemed like an infinite distance.
I'm sorry,
he whispered, blood trickling from his lips.
I'm so sorry I couldn't save you.
His fingers stretched toward her one last time before darkness claimed him, and he slumped forward onto the blood-soaked floorboards. Doreen's battle. Doreen crouched on the terrace, her breath steady as she waited for Ilara's signal. The elf fighter pushed the farmhouse door open, and instantly Zira's firebolt streaked through the entrance, illuminating the room with deadly radiance. The spell struck the orc standing in the center, its flesh charring with a sickening sizzle. Ilara burst inside, his twin blades glinting in the aftermath of the spell's light. His swords moved with lethal precision, cutting deep into the burned orc. Doreen slipped in behind him, pressing herself into a corner, bow drawn and ready. From her position, she took in the room's layout, 2 interior doors and a staircase descending from above, each a potential bottleneck. Suddenly, another orc appeared on the stairs, axe raised high, its muscles rippling in the dim light. Ilara dashed forward to intercept it, but the creature's size was intimidating. Doreen's arrow found its mark in the orc's chest, blood spurting from the wound, yet the monster barely stumbled.
Watch out!
Doreen called as another orc materialized in the doorway beside Ilara, its furious roar shaking dust from the rafters. The creature swung its massive axe at Ilara's head, but fate intervened. The weapon struck the wooden beam above. Morthal charged in after Doreen, his armor clanking as he positioned himself close to the stairs. In one fluid motion, he drove his sword deep into the creature's throat. Meanwhile, Ilara, moving like a deadly dancer, spun to face the other orc in the doorway, his blades singing through the air 3 times before the monster collapsed. Zyra appeared to Doreen's side, pressing herself against the wall, another firebolt forming between her fingers. This was an easy fight, and today Doreen's aim was impeccable.
More coming down!
Morthal's warning thundered through the room. But at the same time, the door beside him also burst open, revealing 4 hulking orcs. Doreen's heart hammered in her chest as she assessed the deteriorating situation. Perfect formation crumbled into chaos as Ilara rushed to block the staircase while Morthal lunged for the other door. But they weren't fast enough. An orc slipped past Morthal, its axe whistling toward Doreen's head. She ducked and rolled, cursing under her breath.
Some warrior of Helm you are,
she said bitterly, watching Morthal fumble the simple task of blocking a doorway. Through the chaos, she saw Ilara had overextended himself on the stairs, leaving a gap that orcs exploited to move in from the doorway, charging straight at Zira.
And there goes our master swordsman, fighting like some green recruit.
She sneered internally. For all their boasting about military experience and combat prowess, neither of them could manage to hold a simple defensive position. Zira's panicked scream filled the room as she scrambled under a nearby table. The orc's axe came down with savage force, splitting the wooden surface in two.
Help, please!
Zira cried out, her voice breaking with terror. Doreen laughed, remembering Halia's advice about maintaining her position within the group. She loosed an arrow at Zira's attacker, striking it dead center in the forehead. A perfect shot, but her satisfaction was short-lived as another orc immediately took its place. Through the doorway, she glimpsed more orcs that couldn't even fit into this room. They were climbing out of the windows, probably to trap them into this room. Morthal was fighting desperately on two fronts, trying to both block the doorway and aid Doreen with her attacker.
Typical hero.
She thought, with a mixture of contempt and grudging respect.
Always trying to save everyone.
Then Zira's terrified cries echoed off the walls again.
Please help! I don't want to die!
And something odd happened. Doreen saw how Ilara froze at the bottom of the stairs, his eyes fixing on Zira with an unsettling intensity. His movements became erratic, his sword strikes weak-willed and careless.
A lie. Don't be afraid, I'm coming.
The words burst from him as he abandoned his position, turning his back on three orcs to charge towards Zira. Doreen couldn't believe her eyes. It was suicide. Time seemed to slow as the orc axes fell. Two brutal strikes landed, one cleaving into his back, the other biting deep into his shoulder. Blood sprayed across the floor as Ilara collapsed. He reached his hand towards Zira in a final desperate gesture.
A lie.
Then he coughed blood onto the floorboards and became motionless. Doreen's mind raced, calculating odds and escape routes. Still, she managed another shot, dropping another of Zira's attackers with an arrow to the chest.
See? I'm helping.
She thought grimly, though she knew it was more about survival than friendship at this point. The situation was beyond salvaging. Morthal took a brutal hit to his helmet, staggering backward. When he and Zira broke for the door, Doreen knew it was time to go.
Useless cowards.
She muttered when she followed their retreat. Her final glance back showed at least half a dozen orcs inside, with more circling the house. As she sprinted past her companions toward the bushes at the yard's edge, Doreen's practical mind was already working. They'd lost Ilara. Well, the fool had it coming, throwing away a perfectly good tactical position for some delusional heroics. If anything, his reckless charge had nearly gotten them all killed.
A lie.
His final words echoed in her head.
What lie?
She wondered briefly, before dismissing the thought. Whatever demons had driven him to such stupidity, they weren't her problem anymore. One less unstable warrior to worry about. Zira's battle. Zira crouched behind Doreen on the farmhouse porch, her heart pounding against her ribs. She watched Ilara's fingers count down silently. 3, 2, 1. In one fluid motion, he yanked the door open, and Zira's hands moved instinctively, sending a firebolt streaking through the doorway. The spell illuminated the dim interior, striking the first orc square in the chest. Before the creature could recover, Ilara lunged forward like liquid silver, his twin blades catching the dying firelight as he dispatched the burning creature with lethal grace. Zira rushed in with Doreen, pressing herself against the outer wall, the familiar weight of magic tingling in her fingertips. Her confidence grew watching Ilara's masterful swordplay. Perhaps this would be easier than she'd feared. That hope was short-lived. A massive orc descended the stairs, axe held high, its muscles rippling in the flickering light. Ilara moved to block its path, blades dancing, while Doreen's arrow whistled past Ilara's ear, burying itself in the orc's chest with a meaty thunk. The creature stumbled but remained standing, its eyes burning with rage.
Watch out!
Doreen's warning came just as another orc burst through the doorway next to Ilara, roaring with murderous fury as it swung its axe at Ilara's head. The blade never arrived as it embedded itself in the doorframe. Trapped between two adversaries, Ilara would have been in trouble if not for Morthal's timely arrival. The cleric's sword found the throat of the orc on the stairs, dropping it instantly. Freed to focus on a single opponent, Ilara's blades became silver arcs of death, and the orc at the doorway fell to the floor. Morthal's warning cry of
More coming down!
thundered through the room as heavy footsteps pounded on the stairs. Before anyone could react also, the door next to Morthal exploded inward, revealing 3 orcs crammed in the doorway, with more visible behind them. Zira's blood ran cold as she watched them push into the room like a deadly tide. Morthal tried to stem the flood at the door, while Ilara fought desperately to hold the stairs, but it was too many. Far too many. One orc slipped past Morthal to attack Doreen, and several closed in from the door next to Ilara to charge straight at Zira. The orc's eyes found her with predatory focus, and Zira screamed for help. Her trembling hands wove desperate patterns of flame, but the magic sputtered and died in the closing gap. These spells weren't meant for enemies breathing down her neck.
Help! Please, somebody!
Her voice cracked as she scrambled backward, lunging for the meager shelter of a nearby table. The first axe whistled toward her skull with killing force. Pure instinct took over as Zira thrust out her palm, a barrier of magical energy deflecting the blade in a shower of sparks. But the second orc was already moving, its weapon crashing down with brutal strength, splitting the wooden table like kindling. Splinters rained around her as she tried to crawl through the wreckage. The third strike came before she could escape. A white-hot explosion of agony as steel bit deep into her leg, turning her desperate cries into a howl of pain.
Help!
She screamed, scrambling backward, her voice breaking with terror. Her back hit the wall. There was nowhere else to go. The orc advanced, axe dripping with her blood.
Please, somebody help me!
Her desperate cries echoed through the chaos of battle, each plea more frantic than the last.
Don't be afraid, I'm coming.
Ilara's voice cut through the mayhem. He spun away from the stairway orcs without hesitation, abandoning all pretense of defense as he charged toward her. In the next heartbeat, everything seemed to slow. From the stairway behind Ilara came the horrific thud of an axe striking him between the shoulders. A spray of crimson painted the air. As he staggered, Zira's attacker whirled around, driving his axe deep into Ilara's chest with a sickening crunch. His body crumpled to the floor before her eyes, blood pooling beneath him. His gaze found hers, filled with such profound sorrow it stole her breath. His blood-stained hand reached toward her, trembling.
I'm sorry.
He whispered, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth.
I'm so sorry I couldn't save you.
Then he was gone. Zira couldn't move, couldn't breathe, her eyes fixed on Ilara's lifeless form. The orc turned back toward her, raising its axe for the killing blow, but Doreen's arrow suddenly sprouted from between its eyes. The massive body crashed to the floor. The shock broke. Zira scrambled to her feet and bolted through the front door, pressing herself against the outer wall, her entire body shaking. Morthal staggered out next, clutching his head as he took cover on the opposite side of the doorway. Moments later, Doreen burst through, sprinting full tilt toward the edge of the forest. Zira stared back into the blood-soaked room at Ilara's body, his final reaching gesture burning like fire in her mind. That outstretched hand, still begging for redemption even in death, awakened something deep within her. Morthal pushed at her shoulder, his voice urgent.
We must go, or we'll die too.
She felt strength rise through her like molten steel, the scales hidden beneath her clothes, pulsing with ancient power. For the first time in her life, she didn't try to hide what she was. She turned to Morthal and met his eyes directly. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of mountains.
We are not going, dear Morthal.
In those words lay not just a statement, but a promise to herself, to Ilara, to everything she had been running from. No more running, no more hiding. Not today. Morthal's battle. The farmhouse door creaked open beneath Ilara's steady hand, and Morthal's breath caught in his throat as Zyra's fireball roared through the doorway. The spell illuminated Ilara's face for a heartbeat, casting harsh shadows across his features before he darted through the smoldering threshold, twin blades gleaming in the dying light.
Helm's breath. I missed the signal.
Morthal cursed inwardly, fumbling with his weapon as Doreen slipped past him into the chaos. The acrid stench of burnt flesh filled his nostrils as he entered, his eyes falling on the charred remains of an orc in the center of the room. Ilara was already engaged in a deadly dance with a massive orc on the staircase, his blades singing through the air with lethal precision.
Watch out!
Doreen's cry pierced the air as a door beside Ilara burst open. Through it charged an orc, its battle axe raised high in a savage arc meant to cleave Ilara's skull. But the massive swing carried too high, sending the axe head crashing into the wooden frame with a thunderous crack. Taking advantage of the moment, Morthal lunged forward, his thrust finding its mark in the staircase orc's throat. Ilara, freed from his first opponent, dispatched the doorway attacker with cruel efficiency. The thunder of heavy footfalls from above drew Morthal's attention.
More coming down!
He barked, but his warning was cut short as another door exploded outward, revealing a chamber packed with snarling orcs. Morthal moved to block their advance, but he was a heartbeat too slow. One of the brutes shouldered past him, bearing down on Doreen with murderous intent.
Some warrior of Helm you are.
Doreen's scathing words cut through the chaos, but Morthal had no time to respond. He planted his feet in the doorway, shield braced against the tide of muscle and crude steel trying to force its way through. From the corner of his eye, he saw Ilara take up a similar position on the stairs, his movements fluid and precise. Then came Zira's cry for help, raw with fear, piercing through the clash of steel and bestial roars. Morthal's instincts screamed at him to turn, to aid her, but he held his ground.
One moment of weakness could doom us all,
he reminded himself. Steel clashed against steel as Morthal fought alongside Doreen, their blades working in desperate harmony against their mutual opponent. Zyra's cries for help echoed behind them, but Morthal forced himself to focus on the immediate threat, knowing that one misstep could doom them all.
Watch your flank!
He barked at Doreen as they pressed their advantage. Their opponent's guard finally broke, and Morthal's blade found its mark. As the orc fell, the sudden silence hit him like a physical force. The familiar rhythm of battle had shifted. Something was wrong. He lifted his eyes from the fallen enemy to find everyone, even the remaining orcs, staring at the floor. Time seemed to slow as he followed their gaze, his heart stuttering at the sight of Ilara sprawled across the wooden floor, crimson spreading beneath his form. One hand was reached outward toward where Zira stood. The moment shattered as an arrow whistled past Morthal's ear, the sharp displacement of air causing him to flinch. Doreen's shot found its mark between the eyes of an orc, the one that had been advancing on Zyra. Before he could process more, white-hot pain exploded through his skull as an axe struck his helmet from behind with devastating force. The world tilted violently, darkness creeping at the edges of his vision as he stumbled back toward the outer door, his legs moving of their own accord. When his sight cleared, he found himself outside the door beside Zira, who stood transfixed, staring at Ilara's motionless form. Doreen was already fleeing towards the tree line, her survival instincts taking over. Morthal's tactical mind quickly assessed their dire situation. About 10 orcs still stood, while he bled beneath his armor and Zyra favored her wounded leg.
We must go, or we'll die too,
he urged, tugging at Zyra's arm with desperate intensity. Blood trickled down her leg, and behind them, the sound of orcish boots thundered against wooden floors. Every second they delayed brought death closer. But when Zyra turned to face him, Morthal's world stopped. Clean trails cut through the grime and soot on her cheeks, evidence of tears already spent, already burned away by something fiercer than grief. Gone was the carefully maintained facade of the sophisticated sorceress.
We are not going, dear Morthal.
The words emerged as a statement of reality, resonating with power that made the very air tremble. Her voice carried the weight of mountains, stripped of all pretense and fear. Morthal's mind raced through possibilities as he stared at Zyra, each strategy crumbling under the weight of reality. They were outnumbered 5-1 and wounded. The truth settled over him like a heavy shroud. This doorway would become his last stand. His grip tightened on his shield as memories flashed through his mind. Countless battles survived, soldiers saved, victories claimed in Helm's name. But this would be different. A strange calm washed over him as he accepted the inevitable. He thought of all the duties left undone, the wrongs in Phandalin still to be righted, the guidance his companions still needed. Yet there was honor in dying like this, protecting others until the very end. His muscles relaxed slightly as peace found him in that realization.
Oh, Helm,
he prayed silently, for what he knew would be the last time.
I am ready to die. Grant me the strength to protect them, for as long as I draw breath.
Divine energy surged through him in response, knitting some of his wounds, a final gift from his god, he thought, to make his last stand matter. Then the first orc charged, and the world narrowed to the width of his shield. Morthal felt the air crackle with power as Zyra reached deeper into herself than she ever had before, drawing upon reserves of magic she didn't know she possessed. The flames that erupted from her hands were not her usual controlled bursts, but a primal inferno that seemed to respond to her desperate need, filling the room with searing heat and terrible screams. Morthal's shield smoldered as he desperately tried to protect them both, the smell of burning leather and flesh mixing in a nauseating cloud. When Zyra's magic finally sputtered out, the orcs still stood. Most of them swayed on their feet, flesh blistered and smoking, their weapons held loosely in charred hands. But one, seemingly driven mad by pain, roared with unbridled fury, his burns only feeding his bloodlust.
They will burn to ashes,
Zyra snarled, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance as she unfurled a scroll from Glasstaff's collection. The resulting inferno transformed the room into a living hell, consuming everything in its path. Only the orc at the doorway survived the initial blast, and Morthal seized the moment of its distraction to drive talon through its heart. As the final orc fell, Morthal cast a desperate healing prayer toward Ilara's motionless form, not even having time to check if his magic had any effect. New war cries split the air behind them, and he spun around, raising his scorched shield once more. Ilara's awakening. The world dissolved into fire and blood. Ilara's consciousness returned in fragments. First, the metallic taste of blood flooding his mouth, then the scorching heat pressing against his skin. His elvish eyes stung as they adjusted to the inferno surrounding him, revealing the charred remains of what had been their battlefield moments ago. One of his twin blades lay just beyond reach, its steel gleaming orange in the dancing flames.
Move!
He commanded himself through gritted teeth, forcing his blood-soaked body to crawl toward the weapon. His fingers found only one blade. The second sword was gone, lost somewhere in the chaos of their assault. The doorframe offered stable purchase as he pulled himself upright, every movement sending fresh waves of pain through his battered form. Outside, the scene that greeted him was a tapestry of violence and desperation. Zyra stood mere feet away, her usual perfectly maintained appearance now marred by wounds and soot. An orc warrior lunged at her from the ground beside the terrace, his great axe cutting deadly arcs through the air.
Your kind shall burn!
Zyra snarled, her voice carrying an edge of something terrible. At the foot of the terrace stairs, Morthal held his ground against two massive orcs, his armor dented but his stance unwavering. The cleric's face was set in grim determination as he parried blow after crushing blow.
Hold fast!
He shouted, his voice carrying the authority that had drawn them all to follow him.
We end this here!
Zyra's hands began to weave patterns of destruction, threads of fire coalescing between her fingers. The flames she hurled were not the controlled spells she typically favored, but raw, emotionally charged bursts that spoke of desperation. An arrow whistled through the smoke-filled air, finding its mark in the side of the orc threatening Zyra. Ilara launched himself toward Morthal, but the distance seemed to stretch endlessly before him. Time slowed as he watched their leader make his choice, a sacrificial gambit. Morthal's charge broke through the first orc's defense, his blessed blade driving deep into the creature's chest. But the second orc's axe was already falling, its cruel edge cleaving through the helm in a single terrible moment.
Morthal!
The name tore from Ilara's throat, raw with grief and rage. His remaining sword found the throat of a smoldering orc, ending its life with swift mercy. The last surviving orc broke into a desperate run toward the cover of nearby bushes. Ilara's pursuit was pure instinct, his blade opening a deep gash across the creature's back. As it staggered toward the tree line, Doreen emerged from concealment, her rapier flashing once in the firelight. The orc fell without a sound. Ilara turned back toward the burning building to see Zyra kneeling beside Morthal's fallen form, her hands trembling as she administered a potion.
Don't you dare leave us!
She whispered, pressing the vial to Morthal's lips.
We still need your lectures about proper behavior and divine purpose.
Her attempt at sarcasm failed to hide the genuine plea in her voice. Doreen kept her distance from Ilara, her hand never straying far from her blade's hilt. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of Zyra fussing over Morthal, the same companions who'd left her to die inside that house while they saved themselves. Still, she forced her features into a mask of concern, remembering Halia's words about the value of appearing loyal, even to those who deserved none.
Zo trennen, lysgyntan, yn y ffilm yn gweithio sbryn o'r gorwydd